NATO treaty doesn't mean what you think it means. And what's going on in space is really important for what's going to go on Earth next. I'm Dr. Jill Goldenziel. I'm a national security expert, and I'm going to tell you what's really going on in the Iran war. I'm not running today, even though this is an episode of I Run While I Explain Iran. And I'm at my desk because I wanted to actually read for a change and tell you about what's going on. Some of the details are really important, and I want you to understand them. In law, in particular, words really matter. So let's get down to it. So, first of all, a lot of people are saying that NATO is legally obligated to jump in and assist the US in the Iran war. And that is not actually true. So, Article 5 of the NATO treaty says that an armed attack against one ally is considered an attack against them all. But this does not mean that NATO allies are obligated to jump in and fight anytime one of them gets into a war. What it actually says in the rest of the article is that each of the NATO allies will assist by taking, quote, such action as it deems necessary, which would include the possible use of armed force. So what this means is that if Article 5 is invoked, which it has only been invoked on 9/11 to assist the United States, then NATO states are supposed to go back to their own countries, and each individual country, usually with their parliament, depending on how their legal system works, will determine what actions they deem necessary to actually fight. Nothing in the NATO treaty says that if one ally gets involved in a war, then the rest of the allies are obligated to get involved. But there's even more to it than that. In addition to Article 5, the NATO treaty also has an Article 6, which we hear less about. And that puts geographic restrictions on NATO to the North Atlantic, Turkey, which is a NATO member, and also includes islands in the North Atlantic, north of the Tropic of Cancer, and on Allied forces, vessels, or aircraft in those defined areas, including the Mediterranean and parts of the North Atlantic. These geographic limits do not include Iran. In fact, they don't even include the British Virgin Islands and French territories held elsewhere. They don't include US mutual defense treaty commitments in Asia, for example. So NATO mutual defense treaty obligations are limited. They are extremely important to the US military. NATO has been an extremely important alliance in deterring Russia over the years since it was founded. So, what is going on involving possible involvement with NATO and with US allies being asked to intervene in the Gulf and declining actually has nothing to do with NATO. And the current discussion of the US withdrawing from NATO doesn't have to do with NATO treaty obligations. It has to do with the relationship right now between US and other states that are in NATO because the US is not, the Trump administration is not happy that our allies and partners have not stepped up the way that they would like to support the Iran. All right. So that's NATO. What else is going on? Well, the Trump administration has put out different interpretations this week of what the aims of the Iran war actually are. I talked in my last video about what White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said yesterday. Marco Rubio this week has also framed the war a little bit differently. Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, said the objectives of the war to destroy Iran's air force, destroy its navy, severely diminish its missile launching capabilities, and to destroy the factories that make missiles and drones so Iran cannot keep attacking US forces in the future. This is a much narrower set of aims than we have heard from the White House press secretary, but also from the president in the past. These objectives, according to our Secretary of State, do not include regime change and do not include opening the Strait of Hormuz. So what exactly this means? Maybe we'll hear more about it in the president's address to the nation at 9 o'clock tonight. But what it says to me is that different officials have made different statements about what exactly our war aims are. If the administration is clear about what those war aims are, they have not put out a consistent message to the American public. Third, and very important thing going on today that most people are missing, NASA's Artemis 2 mission launched today. It is the first crewed lunar mission in more than 50 years, and it's a critical step toward returning humans to the moon. So why do we care about the moon? Because China is planning a crewed lunar landing around 2030. And the United States is very concerned that China will, first of all, militarize space, and secondly, be the first to take advantage of scientific advantages in space and also mining that can happen in space, resources that are available in space. So the US is involved in another space race and wants to get there first and be able to not colonize the moon. Of course, that would be against the Outer Space Treaty, but to be able to explore and take advantage of resources that are there and ensure that space is used for peaceful purposes according to the law of war. So stay tuned. We may not be hearing about space today because the Iran war is dominating the news, but this mission is going to be very important for the future national security of the United States. So let's recap. The NATO treaty is narrower than most people think. Rubio's war aims are more narrow and more explicit than Caroline Leavitt's, the White House press secretary, that announced aims this week, and more narrow than other aims that the administration has put forth in the past. And the new space race is going to be extremely important to national security in the future. Start watching now and you can get ahead. I'm Dr. Jill Goldenseal. I'm an expert in national security and international law. And if you found this video useful, if you learned from it, like and subscribe for more. Thank you.